of course, you know, we deal with a small number of highly, highly ideologically motivated people. And that is definitely the case across the West now. You see very, very ugly ideologues, some in positions of power, sadly. But you also have behind them a different type of person. Then behind them, the largest cohort, which is the ignoramuses. This can't be stressed enough, that sometimes I think Israelis are too clever about trying to explain the situation here. You know, people think, if I just have exactly the best explanation for this, you know, well, you see, in 1973, and I think you are trying to persuade people who know nothing, you know, as we've seen in some popular videos, who don't know what river they're chanting about, don't know what sea they're chanting about. If you spun them around, actually you don't have to spin them around. Just ask them to point to this country on a map and they'd fail. If you ask them, as you've done, you know, how many Jewish states are there, they'll go, oh, I don't know, like 18 or something. They're just, and by the way, I mean, this is a very serious problem, but not just for Israel. It's a problem for the West. In New York State, public schools pay about $30,000 per student for their annual education, which is a lot of money. And proving that money alone doesn't make a good education. And there's just over 50% literacy rates in K through 12, standard basic literacy, and about 51% basic numeracy. So I take it as read that when somebody is chanting some malevolent idiocy on the streets of New York or London, the likelihood is that you could diddle them out of their change at a cash point and they wouldn't notice. They can get from 1 to 10, but after that it's all a mystery. And that has serious repercussions. You know, so, I mean, why would anyone be told or be under the impression that they could sort out the problems of the Middle East if they can't read? It's quite a tall order, that. And I do think that we have to bear in mind this astonishing ignorance in the rest of the world. Yeah. There have been actual genocides going on all the time in our era. Nothing happens about it. I've reported from the genocide against Christians in the north of Nigeria by the Fulani militia and others, and the Western media doesn't care about it. I once came back from reporting from northern Nigeria, and I said to an editor, I've got a very good story about a terrible atrocity that's just carried out, a church of Christians on Easter Sunday, and a suicide bomber went in, and then they started mowing people down as they were running away. And I was told that the paper already had a story from Africa that week, which, if I remember rightly, was from Cape Town. But my point is that there's so many horrors that go on in the world, and it seems to me that what's happening with the so-called Free Palestine movement, which South Africa has jumped on the back of, to some extent it's the same thing that drove that sort of Free Tibet movement a few decades ago. Does anyone remember Free Tibet? It was, I remember when I was growing up, it was quite a thing. People had bumper stickers saying Free Tibet, and you know, occasionally there'd be a small protest of people, well-meaning people. And then it turned out that the Chinese Communist Party wasn't much influenced by bumper stickers in London, and Tibet remained doggedly unfree. And to an extent, what's the real horror of what the ICJ and what South Africa has been trying to do is that it knows, interestingly enough, that this country is vulnerable to international opinion and does care about this. You know, the charge, it's a charge intended to wound the Jewish people. That's what the thing underneath the story is that. It's intended to wound. And, you know, as I say, the Chinese Communist Party puts 1 million people, Uyghur Muslims, into concentration camps. And, I mean, nobody can influence the Chinese Communist Party, it seems. But they know that Israel is vulnerable on a moral level as well as on a strategic level, and that's why they're doing it.
And so, from the International Court to the UN, and we recently heard, I don't think you'll fall off your chair at this, that UNRWA officials were involved personally in the October 7th massacre. What needs to happen to the United Nations?
Well, you know, like you, Michael, I've been in this game for a while now, but I think if you'd have said to me, if we'd have had a conversation even 6 months ago, and you said, an UNRWA employee will be caught with kidnapped Jews in their house, I'd have thought, well, that's going to be a bit much. For UNRWA employees to be involved in the massacre. The one good thing of the last couple of days is that finally there has been that effect that we've talked about before, but that of more than just America noticing there's something rotten in this. Because occasionally America notices there's something rotten in these international institutions. Israel knows there is and suffers on the front line from this. But America occasionally will wake up to this. But others, European countries, you know, Norway, these sort of countries just keep funding them anyway because there's a sort of, well, you've got to give your money to someone to do good in the world or feel you're doing good. And UNRWA is obviously the worst of them, but there are a lot of these UN institutions. I was at a meeting with the families of the children hostages in November with UNICEF officials. And, you know, I mean, somebody said to one of the UNICEF officials, you know, UNICEF has one job, to look after the welfare of children. And they did not bother for over a month to do anything about the kidnapped Jewish children. Nothing. As it turned out, the day that the deputy head of UNICEF came to Jerusalem for that meeting, the head of UNICEF was in Cairo a couple of days earlier where she had a car crash. Not a very serious one, but she used this as an excuse not to come to Jerusalem. And it turned out during the meeting that she was actually in Gaza. And she was not there to look for the missing Jewish children. So there is a profound rot and sickness at the heart of a number of these institutions. And it's a deep problem because people in this country know it, and my goodness, do we know it from the UNRWA case. But can we make the rest of the world understand? That's going to be a great challenge. I mean, look at the case with education in general. Whatever happens after the war in Gaza, who but this country is going to do anything to make sure the textbooks aren't the same? You know, you just see international body after international body failing at its task. Take the northern border as a very good example. As I say, I was here in 2006. I remember at the end of the war with UN Resolution 1701. And, you know, when people talk about Israel abiding by international resolutions, you go, well, the international community didn't abide by 1701, so it appears it's a pick and mix affair. When I was up in Metula the other week, I saw the footage of UN peacekeeping cars coming along the border and Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel, and the UN peacekeeping vehicles did a U-turn and went back to their base. So that's a useful peacekeeping mission. But, you know, with all of these bodies, like, I don't see the amount of shame there should be. I mean, we pay for this, taxpayers in the rest of the world. Sometimes we send troops, and certainly we send aid. Why isn't there deep, deep rage about this? I think you played a bit of that excerpt of me in a recent discussion with Mr. Barghouti, a man who seems to have developed an almost circular breathing technique because he won't shut up.
I believe you stopped him in that clip.
You can,
not breathing,
no,
but you stopped him talking.
I didn't stop him breathing, no. That's important for the record. I've had opponents who've gone to prison, but none that have actually died. But I think I said to Mr. Barghouti, I mean, look at these hundreds of millions of pounds that we've given to the PA, that they spend on terrorist salaries and so on. I can't understand why the rest of the world isn't furious, even if they don't care about it on a moral case, just on a fiscal base. Maybe there's something you could do better with the money than incentivizing people to go and murder Israelis. How about that?
I agree with you. Let's turn to an area that Stand With Us is very involved with, the university campus. And so, of course, we saw the congressional hearing where 3 heads of major campuses, MIT, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, were not able to unequivocally condemn calls for genocide against Jews on their campus. Where have we got to, and where do we go from here? Did America take notice?
Well, it definitely took notice. Arguably the most successful congressional hearing for some years. I mean, wow, did that reverberate around the world, and rightly so. I mean, you know, sometimes it's worth noting when something's really caught on and people have actually woken up to something. I mean, lots of people have diagnosed the rot in American higher education for, 40 years since Alan Bloom published The Closing of the American Minds about what was going wrong on American campuses. And it's all gotten worse. But the heads of, the fact that you would have the presidents of 3 such esteemed institutions proving themselves to be so immoral. I actually have a friend who's at MIT who phoned me after the hearing and said, what do you think? I said, well, among other things, apart from sounding utterly immoral, the presidents of the 3 colleges sounded like ChatGPT. And of course, it's because they're reading their highly lawyered answers off, you know, and it's all about the risk of future litigation, among other things. It's this sort of, you know, and I said, what's the name of the one from UPenn? I said, she was smirking as she was doing her answers, as if she was being so clever or precise. And my friend said, well, why don't we put the questions into ChatGPT and see what it says? So we did. And the answers were really very good. ChatGPT, when asked about the question of genocide that so completely flummoxed Claudine Gay, said genocide is recognized as wrong in every known moral system. Well, it turned out that the AI was more moral than the head of Harvard. That was an interesting experience. Yes, I mean, but it's one of the first times there has been a price to pay for that. And I'm delighted about that, but I hope that the replacements are not simply equally immoral idiots who just happen to know how to tread around that landmine, which is possible. I think people should watch out for that. And
I think that the only reason they won't be is if we hold their feet to the fire.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, also with funding, I mean, I'm bewildered by much to do with American higher education funding, because it seems to me that Harvard, for instance, has an endowment of, I think, hundreds of billions of dollars. And in my view, there's no reason why a higher education institute should have that money when there are people who need scholarships. And it should pay down its endowment in education, instead of sitting on this huge pot of money and proving themselves to be an utterly immoral institution. So I think that people should just not donate to any of these colleges. So if anyone here is still doing so, I hope they don't. But it's really very important because, as Andrew Sullivan said some time ago, you know, there was a time when we hoped that this idiocy would stay on American campuses. But as Andrew Sullivan wrote, we all live on campus now. And that is certainly the case in America. Everything that happens at the campuses ends up flooding through the rest of the culture, you know.
Many people are saying to Israel, you can't beat Hamas. You've set this goal, and I'm sure maybe you discussed it with the Prime Minister today. You've set this goal of completely defeating Hamas, but you can't defeat Hamas because it's an ideology. What's your response to that?
Well, they often say it's an idea. That's another one, ideology or an idea. Well, there's several things about that. The first thing is, I've heard that said a lot in campaigns against terrorist groups and others. There's always the claim, for instance, that if you fight the terrorist group, you will create more terrorists. which is a logical cycle that does not work, because of course that means that you should simply never fight terrorism, because if you do, you'll create terrorists, which means you just sort of have to stand back and take it, which doesn't seem to me viable. The second thing about this is that it's just not true that you can't defeat a terrorist group. You can defeat the leaders, certainly. You can kill or capture the leaders. That's eminently possible. I think there's I talked about this with the Prime Minister earlier a bit. I think there is a complexity at the moment of having the mission of simultaneously destroying Hamas and also having to negotiate with Hamas. I think that is a very tricky juncture. But, I mean, lots of ideas have been destroyed. I mean, you know, Nazism was destroyed. Communism, although it lingers again on American college campuses primarily, but it lingers, but it was pretty much destroyed in 1989, 1990. There are residue countries like North Korea still vaguely trying versions of it, but it was destroyed. And it was partly also, of course, destroyed on the battlefield of ideas, which is one of the reasons why it gives me great, some people say, well, there are so many lies in the world, so many liars, so many horrible things being said by horrible people, and how can you possibly intend to pierce through them? And I always say that history is just filled with people who destroyed bad ideas, and the way in which communism was brought down is a very good example. When Alexander Solzhenitsyn was writing, could he have imagined the impact it had? The vast crack on the Iron Curtain, the wall that was caused by his work. When Václav Havel was writing and working, he helped destroy this horrible idea. And communism was much, much more widespread than Hamas. So when people say it's not possible, I think they're not imaginative enough, among much else. May I say something in closing? Sure. First of all, thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. There are quite a lot of things you can do on a Sunday night, so I'm very grateful to be able to spend the evening with you. Secondly, let me just make one observation, if I may, a closing one. One of the most moving conversations I've had since I've been here was actually with a taxi driver the other week. And I say this with great hesitation because one of the rules of journalism is that you should never quote a taxi driver. Not because taxi drivers cannot be filled with wisdom, but because it's journalistically lazy. Usually when somebody says, because normally journalists say, I was speaking to a source the other day. Yeah, you were putting in the hard work on the way to the bar. But I was speaking to a taxi driver the other day, and he turned out he'd served in '73 and so on. And he said something so moving to me. He said, we talked about what was going on. He had a child in the IDF, and everyone else knew people who'd suffered on October the 7th. And he said to me, I owe the younger generation an apology. He said, I owe them an apology. I said, why? He said, because I thought young Israelis had become weak and thought they spent all of their time on X and, Instagram and WhatsApp. They would spend all their time doing influencer stuff. And I thought that if we faced a situation like 73, I thought they would. He said, I owe them an apology. They're remarkable. They've stepped up. And I just want to say in closing that is one of the things that I take great hope from in this country. And it's not just that the Israelis are doing well, that you're doing well, it's that I genuinely believe that the people of this country are giving an example to the world. When I speak to young people in this country who 18, 19, 20, 21, 20, you know, what are you doing? I'm expert in intelligence in Yemen. You know, and you know, I sort of say, well, your contemporaries in America and Britain are like wasting their lives with no concept of the world and no concept of the good they could actually do in the world. And these young men and women are going to be in their 30s and their late 20s and be remarkable people, having done remarkable things and put through remarkable trials and having come through them. And I think that this is an example to the rest of the world. Everybody asks themselves, what would I do if, you know, the situation that my forebears went through? Everybody of my generation in the UK thinks, what would we have done in my grandparents' generation? Young Israelis have shown what they would do in their grandparents' generation. And they've shown not just their grandparents, but the world. And I want not Israelis to compare themselves to the rest of the world. I want the rest of the developed democracies of the world. I want their people to compare themselves with the Israelis, because if they do, it's them that will be found wanting.